This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by The Thistle Grimoire, a new, horrible, occult manuscript available from Stranger Fiction this October at the Winnipeg Comic Con.
Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. My long-suffering co-host, Justin Curry, known the world over as Chasing Artwork, is jet-setting his way off to New York Comic Con. So we wish you safe travels and good luck, buddy. You're going to kill it. I have replaced you in the interim with friend of the podcast and fellow podcaster, Dr. Jonathan Ball, PhD, also of his own podcast, Writing the Wrong Way, and my co-conspirator on a number of projects like Last Breeds and Princess and the Dragon and The Eye Collector and a few others.
Said a number of problems.
Problem. You know what? You have often caused problems, but it's important that you pick people who, when they solve the problem, you're glad it wasn't you. Also, Dan Vadeboncoeur, our producer extraordinaire, but we are bringing him in today to talk about, gentlemen, the mushy middle of our drafts. So, dear listener, my assumption is many of you are working on novels or comic scripts or movie scripts or something to do with words and pictures all in a pile. And recently, I turned in, and it's just been approved, so I'm allowed to talk about it now. I turned in an episode for a docu-series called UFO POV, a new series that's coming out from Farpoint Films. And I got stuck writing my episode in what is sometimes referred to as the mushy middle or the messy middle. And while I was stuck, I turned on Writing the Wrong Way. And who should I hear in my ears but Dan and Jonathan talking about getting stuck in the middle? So I thought, let's steal those good ideas for this show. And maybe you can help me while we talk about these things. How's that sound?
It sounds good, except you said you solved your problem already. So
you turned in the script.
What do you need? Yeah, what do you need?
You're way ahead of us. So.
Why don't you tell us how you did it?
Well, what I did, and just for the sake of the dear listener to frame the conversation, Dan is working on a feature-length horror movie script, and he's come into the weeds or the swampy bottom of the mushy middle of his middle acts. Jonathan and I worked on a feature film script together, which we sold and then co-produced as the film Princess and the Dragon. And the director, us as producers, supported the director's decision to fire us writers and replace a bunch of scenes in the mushy middle with something that the director preferred to include. And so even though we had it one way, when it went into production, it was all thrown out. So this is, in a way, to answer your question, just because they said yes doesn't mean there isn't something wrong with it.
Okay, so that could still happen.
It could still happen. Okay. And it's
What happened?
particularly in docuseries, like with Alien POV, it's the editor. The editor puts that whole show together. So anything they don't like about my stuff will get excised with impunity.
Can I ask, what's the format of the show? Is it like you're just kind of narrator over video footage, or what's the...
So I've done a few episodes for the Farpoint series. One was called I Knew My Killer. It might got renamed. Jonathan wrote on that one too.
Yeah.
One was called Spring Break Murders. And
Lovely stuff.
yeah, so this was a nice departure from that because I didn't have to read crime scene analysis of real human events. Instead, I got to see cut down video and interviews with aviation experts, exobiologists, astrophysicists, like real scientists, and then also UFO enthusiasts, like what's the word? Amateur network
Ufologists?
Ufologists, thank you very much.
That is the term.
Yes, and also people who had a unique individual experience. And so once you have all that stuff kind of in a pile, the job of the writer of those shows is not in a typical script format. Usually It's in 5 columns where you have the visual that is present, the audio that is present, the narrator or voiceover that might be there. It's all by time code. It's very different than writing a script where you're like,
I've seen these. I'm familiar with this. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So, but you still end up in the mushy middle because whether you're putting the words in their mouth or using their words and putting them in the order that you need it, it still has to have the right structure. So just for the sake of the dear listener, Jonathan, why don't you explain the colloquial nature of what we refer to as a mushy middle in terms of the act structure, a 3-act structure?
So normally people talk about stories having a 3-act structure, the beginning, middle, end. And in screenwriting in particular, which Dan's engaged in to a different degree you're talking about, screenplays are often talked about as falling into a 3-act structure in which the first act, let's say in a feature screenplay, the first act is roughly 30 pages, the second act is roughly 60 pages, the third act is roughly 30 pages again. Now, the immediate math of it, you can see, means that the second act is twice as long, generally speaking, as the first and third act. To me, that's an immediate indication that this is a trash way of thinking about story structure. Makes no sense at all. But nevertheless, that's what people tend to normally talk about. And the problem that they get into is, I think, caused by the fact that they think about stories in this way. That's just my personal take. But regardless of my personal take, the problem everyone gets into is in the middle of the second act, you start running out of things to write. And you lose steam, and you kind of, can get lost in what's called sometimes the desert of the second act, more dramatically, but less dramatically in the kind of middle of the project, where, it's the middle of the story, the middle of the project. And what should happen here is, it's kind of, you get in this position where you've lost your initial motivation that was exciting you and getting you into it. By this point, it's really work. It's maybe not exciting work anymore, and it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, it gets harder. So to help frame the conversation, dear listener, that first act, you often are responsible for why this, why now, what's happening to bring you into the story. That second act is often or sometimes characterized as, oh, this, what now? And you repeat that basically.
Yeah, it's a repetitive structure.
This, what now? And then your last 30 pages are, now this, what next?
Because understand, when we're talking about stories, especially in that middle act, after you've had a catalyst that happens and a conflict arises, then people are committed to resolving that conflict in some way. Before you get to the climax and, these kind of crisis actions, they do the biggest thing they could possibly do to try to solve the problem. Will it succeed? We will find out. In between there, you have a repetitive escalation structure. No matter what story you have, no matter how long it is, it's the same repetitive escalation structure where they have to try something to resolve the conflict. It fails. Because it failed, the problem gets bigger and worse. Because it is bigger and worse, it's more important to solve it. Therefore, they have to try a bigger thing. And you just have that structure, escalating structure, again and again and again. And so there's a couple problems you can get into real quick. One is if you don't have the structure, and it is truly a mess. But two is just, how do you keep making it bigger and bigger, but then not too big too fast, where you have nowhere else to go, or you get into a pacing issue, you get into the repetitive nature of things. How do you make it repetitive structurally?
I get dialogue problems. I can't think of anything interesting for people to say. Right.
Right. It's just you have basically you have to fill the time on a certain level, but you also have to fill it in a certain structured way or it won't work.
That continues the idea here being, and what I was struggling with, to have a mounting interest that seems equivalent to the payoff that you have settled on. But I want to say this and just open this up to the discussion, and then I'd love to talk to Dan about where he feels the problem in his script are. But what I realized in my episode is that whether or not I feel the payoff is good enough, all that matters is that I add the escalation. And once I settled on that I didn't have to have it pay off as much as I'm escalating it, then I was able to deliver the draft much more quickly.
come in peace. We come in peace. We come in peace.
That is exactly right. And that is what people do not understand. It does not matter anything except the escalation. David Lynch knows this. If you watch Lynch,
Because he's
any
escalated into the
particular
afterlife? Is that what you mean?
well, but if you look at Lynch's films, what Lynch has figured out is that all that matters is escalation. Nothing else matters. Plot doesn't matter. The characters being the same person from scene to scene doesn't matter. Using the same actor to play that character from moment to moment doesn't matter. The lighting doesn't matter. Like the film, whether it looks good doesn't matter. Nothing matters except for the escalation.
Which is, if you use a popular example in horror filmmaking, The Blair Witch, the payoff, it's kind of boring, but the escalation is so interesting.
In fact, it's better because they don't pay it off fully.
In a way, yeah.
You know,
I think it's because it's such a simple execution, and I think that that's what it does is simplifies things so much more. It gives you way less to worry about. Part of my problem, as I'm stuck in the middle here, is I worry about too much. I worry about, did I set this up properly earlier in the story? I thought of this thing I'm going to put in here now, but I have to go back and fix it later. Or sometimes I'll just go right back and fix it right there, but that throws me off track. So then my mind is all over the place. Whereas if you just focus on the escalation, then it's just make sure that happens.
it just gets scarier and scarier and scarier.
Yeah, and then you can work at all the other details later, or you don't care about
It. Have to make sense, frankly.
Not in your first draft. No, for sure.
no, but not even.
But not even ultimately. To be fair, like what matters in a horror film is if it is scary.
Right.
And so, yes, it'd be great if other things were the case, but that's the thing that has to be the case.
Like The Village is a good example of a film. I won't spoil it here, but if you know the end, nothing is scary about the film if you knew the end.
It's a rug pull ending. I like a lot of things in that film.
But if you watch The Descent, you can know exactly how it's going to end. The Neil...
I blank on his name. It's a fantastic movie.
Can we look? Yeah, The Descent.
The Descent, sure.
I want to credit the director properly because the vision and the execution are so good. And
sorry, what was the first movie you said before that?
Remember his name?
Well, I said The Descent.
The Descent is the one we
just
care
before
about.
that. What were we talking about?
The other one you were talking about, the Village, which is
The Village was spoiled by a trivia game I was playing the other day.
Oh, that's too bad.
Like the ending of it was spoiled right there. I'm like, that's not good. Good question. Anyway,
so it was all a dream ending. That's not literally what it is.
Neil Marshall is
Neil Marshall,
right?
yeah,
The Descent.
Neil Marshall, he with The Descent creates a film where the escalation is constant, and what he has done, you can also see his work, almost the exact same format he uses again in the Lost in Space television show. And what he does in that thing, which I think is really important.
Did he do that too?
Yeah.
You could tell.
Where you can really important.
That's interesting.
Is he has a list of what people are afraid of, and then he uses each of them in order.
Yeah.
So like the dark, small spaces, being confined in water, being trapped underwater, breaking a bone and seeing it, breaking a bone and the person not wanting to tell you how bad it is, right? Your friend in danger, your friend who has betrayed you in danger, right? All of these different things, which are like common human experiences, he just puts as the series of events. So in Lost in Space, everyone is an episode. Like, drowning is an episode. Trapped in the dark is an episode. I'm suffocating is an episode. In The Descent, he puts all of them in rapid fire succession in a row.
One of the things
and then there's a monster. It's like not even the worst, scariest part of the movie. It's like all this stuff that could happen to you. And then the only thing that could possibly make this series of bad events worse is if there was a monster in the dark, and there is.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I feel often really trips people up in this middle of the story is they'll have in their head this idea that, X happens and then, Y should happen and then Z should happen. And they'll know like really clearly what X is. They'll know really clearly what Z is, but they won't necessarily know very clearly what Y is. But they'll be like, in that. So there's a couple ways they'll get stuck. Like they'll get stuck thinking they have to write Y before Z, for example. when, of course, you don't have to. But the other thing they'll often get stuck in, I find, is, again, they'll have this idea that, well, you need, A and then B and then C has to happen. A, leads to B, B leads to C. And that's all true. But often you don't need B at all. You can just cut right to C. Often you can go A to C. And so people will often spend a lot of time trying to drum up some connective tissue that isn't necessary at all.
Yeah. I'll see you that, and I'll raise you the Die Hard, right? We know he's divorced. We don't need to know why. We don't need to know how. We don't need to know any of that. We just need to know that their relationship is in jeopardy. And also everyone else is in jeopardy.
Yeah. They're separated in the first one.
Separated, yes. And they might work it out. Right?
Well, by the end of the movie, you think they are going to, because they have this great moment at the end. But I don't know how that works out for John McClane.
Well, this is a good thing to talk about when we're talking about the mushy middle. You're thinking what should be happening will escalate, but is also human, that has a little bit of that quote unquote X factor, right? The bit, that spark that makes people go, oh, I see myself there. The classic mushy middle solution that I see all the time in books, novels, comics, whatever, is a will they, won't they moment, right? Two characters that may or may not be attracted to each other is a way to escalate a scene where everyone in the room can relate to the idea that maybe they wish they were with that person and can't get with them. Mm-hmm. Maybe they don't want to be with that person at all, and that person's interested in them. Or, oh, there is a spark, but now the escalation of the other events constantly prevents it from happening, right? So we just watched, Lyndon can take full credit for suggesting this, I believe, Tucker and Evil versus
that's great.
Evil. I had avoided it because it looked so bad. But
I don't know what you're watching where it looked bad.
But I take it back. The escalation in it was hilarious.
You assumed it was bad based on nothing but the poster.
But they knew that there would be a mushy middle where they can't sustain just everyone accidentally killing themselves. And so they put in the will they, won't they from Act
Right.
1.
Yes, that's right. I remember that.
Right.
It's funny because I've decided, I think I did have that in Meat House, but I've decided since to take it out.
Yeah, I personally don't like it. But he's right about everything. Right?
No, I'm not saying do it. Mm-hmm. I'm saying when in doubt, you could try it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And also the love triangle is another great solution to the messy. You mush. Solve the problem of the middle. Because what we'll do is it'll ask you to reevaluate the character relationships in that way. If there was a love triangle, if there's a will they, won't they, who would try to be preventing it?
But this
doesn't mean you have to include it. It makes you reevaluate.
But I think the more core thing there, it's good advice, but the more core thing I think that people should kind of understand is it's really just a matter of doing things you haven't done yet. So one of the reasons that can work is because what you end up with is a scene that has maybe, Bob and Sue are in the scene together, whereas before they weren't in a scene together. Before it was like a scene with Bob and Sarah, and there was a scene with Sue and Sarah. Well, now here's a scene with Bob and Sue. Maybe we could have a scene with Bob and Sarah, and Sue together later. It really is as mathematical as so what's the thing you haven't already done?
Okay, so you just look at all the different combinations of all the different characters.
Yeah,
right.
Just try a scene that has a different combination of characters.
So to make direct sense of that to your listener, what he's talking about is if you have three characters, A, B, and C, then you write a scene that has A and B together, a scene that has B and C together, and a scene that has A and C together, and just see what
talking about the
and have them talk about the missing person.
Right, because what people will do is the tendency that a newer writer will have is oh, I got these three people, and they all are cross purposes. I'll put them together in a scene, and we'll see them at cross purposes. No, you build up to that. First, you have a scene where the two are together, talking about the third. Then you have a scene where 2 and 3 are together, talking about one. Then you have a scene where you just do the combinations. That gives you a build up. So now when you finally see the three of them together, it's more explosive. What a lot of writers will do is they'll jump to that immediate thing. So you don't get a build up, 1. You don't get the time a build up takes, 2. And then you just see the So you're not eating pages in that, useful way, but also you're pacing it too quickly, and just jumping ahead. Now you're escalating too fast. It really is almost that mathematical sometimes.
Whoa, you made the international sign of the donut.
Another way to use this, and I'll use an example that a lot of people have seen in the first Alien film, right? You have a lot of scenes that are two characters together talking about a third character or the opinion of the third character. But one thing that happens in that story structure is anytime Ripley and a crew member are making a good decision, we should do this. Let's not let them into the ship. I know it's bad. I know it's harsh, but we have a quarantine. You have the character who is at cross purpose with them in the very next scene doing it anyway.
Yeah. Ash lets them in.
Right? Just Ash opens the door.
Yeah.
Right? And now the audience, which has heard the very cogent, impassioned argument, agrees with it. And then someone has undone it and you now take sides.
Yeah.
Right?
The worst version of that is all the same stuff happens, but in the reverse order. The person's coming in, Ash opens it, and why did you do that? We could have done, this and that. It's like, well, now it's just a bunch of explanations. Who gives a shit anymore? Mm-hmm. Whereas before it was a buildup, and that's I think often the thing people will kind of, they won't realize how they can build up to things and how they're maybe not building up to things and jumping ahead too fast. And so you get into this messy position where you're really on page 80, but you're trying to write page 60. And so, well, what do you do next? You can't go anywhere because you have 20 more pages before you can get to the thing that's going to happen near the climax. You kind of understand that, but you've sort of you kind of moved too fast before this point.
I don't care about page numbers, but I want to ask you a couple of questions.
But just to show
47.
you the idea, though.
47?
48.
48 pages?
Yep.
Of those, what percentage of the writing have you done that is Act 1?
Oh, I would say it's about the 30-ish.
So
I'm done Act. Yeah, I think.
1,
yeah.
And now you're stuck.
So I'm literally in the middle of the. I want a 90-page screenplay, so I'm literally in the middle of it. Yeah.
And so you're in the actual, and you're writing it page at a time.
Yeah, and that's what I find. That's when I run into trouble when I'm trying to write this sequentially. Okay, here's the next scene. I take out my card. I look at my card and what I've written. I'm like, okay, let's try and write this, and then I have a hard time with it. I'm thinking maybe I should, if I can't think of anything for that scene, I should just move on to the next scene or try and write something else and just write everything that I think of.
Often the scene you're having a hard time writing isn't a necessary scene at all that you'll just cut.
Okay.
Or you're better off to never write.
Or you're trying to write with the audience in mind instead of yourself in mind. Mm-hmm. If you find the books on the shelf to be the most interesting thing in that scene, whether it's related to the plot or not, you should definitely write about it. And that will get the page.
Right.
It'll get the momentum going. And you can always cut writing that is off topic, but it's hard to build writing momentum. So when I find, I'm working on a novel draft right now that is, I'm doing longhand, and it's forcing me to go in order. Mm-hmm. And it's killing me, Dan. It's absolutely killing
your hand to it.
Right? But I have another project where I'm able to jump around in. And so when I feel totally frustrated, I go into that one and I can jump around and that's fine. I feel like I've accomplished something. But the truth is, I don't know if I have. I've just been making a mess for 2 hours. Whereas with the novel draft, I am writing it as it happens, a page at a time. And it is real hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've been doing as a habit is whatever's on the character's mind, whatever's on my mind, I put in the character's mind and have them think about, and then ask the question, what does this have to do with what's happening? Why am I distracted by these thoughts? Right? And it gets them thinking, gets me thinking in the right direction. A lot of it'll get cut, but it gets me writing.
This is what I tell students about podcasting. We just talked about this in class today. Podcast about what you love and what you're interested in. Don't worry about your audience. They will come. They will find you if they like the same things.
And even if they don't, so what? That's not the point of practicing how to do stuff.
But when you create any type of content, it's basically you create what you like, and then other people will also like it. There are other people out there who are like you, so they will also like this stuff.
But the reality also is it doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to escalate.
That's right. You brought that back.
This is the thing. I'll use this trick a lot. If you look at my book, The Lightning of Possible Storms, there's a story in there called Explosions, and Explosions is a story about a guy who writes a story called Explosions, and because it has explosions in it, it gets optioned as a Hollywood film. And so then the writer gets brought in to write the first draft of the script and so on and so forth. And it becomes this sort of, this sort of conflict with this writer who's a madman. and this producer who's trying to get this movie made, and so on. And one of the things I do in that story is
it's both satire and autobiographical.
Yeah.
So this is coming from someone.
I use in there a trick that I use a lot, which is, so like there'll be a scene where, say, the two characters are in the room together and they're disagreeing about, the script. So, the writer wants to do things a certain way, the producer wants things done a different way. And so they sort of have their little back and forth. And then, you have a moment where I need it to move past that point where they've each had their say about where they think the script should go. But what they need to do now is move on to the acknowledgement of the premise below this, which is the writer has threatened the producer. And if he doesn't get his way, the producer might get killed or attacked by this writer in an explosion. Whereas the producer is relaying notes from, the real powers, in this case, Christopher Walken is the person giving these notes. The producer's passing the notes along. The producers lost their sort of person power, but they're in this position of power. The writer has gained a bunch of power, but he's still, in a subservient position on a certain level. So they have this sort of deadlock power struggle going on in this office. They each say their piece, but they don't resolve it. So how do you get out of the scene? How do you get out of the scene and resolve the situation? Well, what I did was I had the character, a trick I do a lot, which is I just start talking about a totally disconnected thing. So I just started talking about as he's saying things to the writer just turns and looks out the window, and he can't see and he doesn't seem to be paying attention anymore. He just seems to be agreeing with things, but it's clear that he's not agreeing with anything. So now he's gone from, trying to convince you to, making it clear I'm not going to do anything you said. But what he's saying on the surface is, yes, sure, makes sense. Yes, sure, makes sense. And meanwhile, this producer, so now he recognizes this is happening, but he doesn't know how he's supposed to combat it. And meanwhile, this guy's not even looking at him. This guy's looking at the window. So he's trying to look at the window now. And he's like, look, you can't see what the writer's looking at. But that's just the dynamic I needed to get to. So I just needed a dynamic shift where instead of them butting heads over the problem, it's just the one has removed himself from it, the situation. It's just become clear that this is going to be a worse problem. It's not going to get resolved. It's just going to escalate.
Another way to think about that in escalation, the framing of escalation, wiser writers have said this to me, is that life doesn't care about a plot. Life is messy and there's constantly interruptions. But a plot is when the character has to choose to ignore the interruptions in favor of, the action of the plot. And how they choose to ignore those things become escalations. For example, people get hungry, people get thirsty, people get horny, people get lonely. People have all of these things, and how a character is forced to deal with them while servicing the plot of whatever evil plan or terrible disaster or subtle horror is building. Those things are what you do in the middle. That mushy middle is so that you have a chance for the character to reveal themselves. Right?
And what I'm trying to get at in a scene like that, I'm just trying to move from a position where at the start of the scene, you think you know what the writer's going to do. And then at the end of the scene, you don't know what he's going to do next. And it's like the tension or the anxiety of, well, what is this guy going to do next? What is he going to do next? And it just becoming, a dangerous, question.
And actors, they call it giving them the business, right? Giving them something to do.
So exactly. It's just a piece of business.
It's just business.
So here's an example.
Exactly what it is.
If you're writing a detective story, right? A true blue 50s noir detective story, Private Dick in his office. At some point, he's going to open the whiskey bottle and pour himself a drink.
We have to strike now, sir. Annihilate, kill.
When does he do that in this scene, Dan? You choose. The beginning, the middle, or the end? You tell me.
The end.
He's going to do it at the end.
Yeah.
So what precipitates him needing a drink?
Yeah, some bad news.
Some bad news.
Right.
Is it his bad news or someone else's bad news that would make him take a drink?
His bad news.
His bad
Right.
news. So now
But the news isn't.
hold on. Now he has to receive bad news that is personal to his life. That has nothing to do with being a detective. So now the opening scene is the detective stuff interrupted by bad news, which results in him needing to get a drink.
Yeah.
And while he's pouring the drink, every action that character takes tells you what he actually feels about the bad news before you reveal what it is. Maybe to the reader.
Here's a mistake people will
That's
make.
the middle solved by that.
And here's a mistake writers will make. They'll try to come up with what the bad news is.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. He gets a phone call. He picks up the phone. He doesn't say anything. You don't hear him what's said on the other line. He hangs up the phone. He pours himself a drink.
Yeah.
We never need to know what the news is.
Yeah. And in fact, if you're now rewriting, now you're into second draft, what you do is you make sure that the things that precede that phone call are the kind of things that every other regular person would need a drink for. And he takes it in stride. And then when the phone call hits, now he has escalated. His mood is something has escalated that the audience is not completely aware of, but they know how the character is reacting to. Alfred Hitchcock would say, it's only interesting to put the bomb under the table if the audience can see it and the characters can't see it, right? So you have to have, that's the reverse of those two things, right? Something bad's going to happen to the characters that the audience knows. So while two people are having their conversation, same thing, 50s detective noir, right? And we keep cutting to a person on the subway. So it's a person, the detective, and say the woman, the classic femme fatale comes in and they're having the conversation. Cut to a subway ride, just some shoes and a briefcase. Oh, weird. Then there more of them. Then cut to, a staircase. Cut back to them escalating. Oh, this guy is after me. I have to do something. Cut back to an open window, open case, assembling the rifle, right? They're talking some more. Now we're looking through the scope and we're seeing the person. The characters don't know that this person has traveled through their entire conversation to find them and look at them through the scope of the rifle. Those two things arrive together, but all that other stuff seems in and of itself boring, just shoes on the subway, until you have the reveal of what they're there looking through in the scope.
And
you
a lot
have those A, B, and C moments converge in that way.
And the thing people often fail to understand is the specificity of it often doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter what that guy was looking out at the window, but I made it a question in the scene specifically because it doesn't matter. So like the guy, so he notices he's looking at something out the window. He's trying to see what it is he's looking at. So now the reader's like, well, what is he looking at? And you never find out what he's looking at because it doesn't matter. The whole point is we don't know what he's looking at. We don't know how he's seeing things. We don't know what his point of view on this whole is. And that's what makes him dangerous.
So do you think, gentlemen, our problems with the middles, it's that we are too focused on feeling like we're in charge of everything, and so we should know also? Do you think maybe?
I think it's a lack of clarity of vision in terms of what's important in this scene.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying.
And so what your default is, well, I should know more about this scene, right? So the default people will get into is like, well, I need to know like everything about this world. I need to know.
This is talking about world building. The episode
they get into world building. You get wrapped because it seems like the solution is to build the world.
Yeah.
And seems like exactly it's absolutely incorrect. Yeah. It seems like it's like, well, what happened when he was 10 years ago? How did he get into this mess? Like when none of that matters. What matters is the mess they're in.
You know what's really great is if you watch very well written, tense, high stakes, low budget dramas. Usually what happens to the escalation, I shouldn't say usually, but one trick, dear listener, I apologize in advance, because now that I'm going to say
ruining all movies,
seeing it all the time.
I love to say that.
In the high stakes drama moment, someone will spill something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that creates a way for everyone to react, but also for them to switch the tone of the tension, because you can't escalate anger of that type. You know, if it's two characters arguing about who's in love, or someone's cheating, or someone's stealing, or someone's embezzling, and then someone spills a drink. Now they've got also ruined pants that are also added into the whole thing. And now their overreaction is okay because someone just spilled something on them. And now they'll overreact in a way that you go, oh man, if they just hadn't spilled on them, we would have watched that scene forever.
There's a great moment in Lost Highway by David Lynch where they're at a party and his wife is kind of drunk and she's sort of, flirting with, it seems like she's getting friendly with this guy and he's been suspecting her of cheating. And then she asks him for another drink. And he goes over to the bar and he orders 2 drinks, and then he drinks the one and then he immediately drinks the other. And so you're like, oh, so it's this great moment where he's ordered his wife a drink, you think, but then he drinks the drink. And then it just sums up everything he's feeling about like the relationship dynamic at the moment. And so therefore Lynch doesn't have him go back to the wife. He instead has a separate scene completely unfold because that scene has just escalated to the maximum position. Right. So he just moves into the next thing. And like that becomes a setup for a different thing. And, he's really a master of figuring out like how far you can take the escalation and then when to shift it.
Mm-hmm. There's a danger in any kind of shifting POV also. Mm-hmm. I find I avoid writing shifting POVs in any of my long form prose or really in anything that I do because I feel it's hard to maintain an escalation. I have to start over to escalate something.
Okay, let me speak to this because what you were doing in your previous example where you're saying cut to this person, yeah. Cut back and forth. I was doing that because that's how I see movies play out, right? I am writing this as I see a movie, so I want to have, and I have 3 different, like right at this point in the story, I've split my group up into 3 different groups in different parts of the house, and they're doing different things. And so now I find myself wanting to go, okay, let's check back with this group. Let's check back with this group. And so, but I'm trying to be aware of all 3 of them and I'm trying to weave it together. And I find that difficult. Whereas I think, and we talked about this and I've tried this since our conversation, Jonathan, it's working better. I'll just try writing out the one part of that. So the one part where you had the woman talking to the guy or whatever she was doing, I would write out that entire thing. Then I would write out the sequence where the guy's putting the gun together. And then in the second draft, I would figure out how they fit together.
And the reality is, I forgot to mention this in that because I mentioned that conversation. What you're doing is you're directing it instead of writing it.
Yeah,
you kind of start directing it in your head. And one of the things that I forgot to mention though is what you realize later is it doesn't matter what order you put those things in the script because the editor will change them.
Yeah, and that's what I realized that scripts are not written the way a movie plays out. Like it changes.
They just can't put it like they'll never cut it the way your movie script cuts it. For whatever reason, it won't work to do it that way. Like, and it's sometimes weird stuff. It's like you're looking at the edit and you're like, it doesn't. She blinked weird, so we can't use that scene, and therefore we can't cut this one in front of that one.
Or the focus puller missed something.
Sometimes it's just a mistake. They can't use the footage because of some mistake. And therefore they don't have the option to cut it the way you want to cut it. And you've reflected it in the script. Other times it's just a weird thing. It's just like for some reason when you see that and then see the other thing, it's not scary anymore. Or like it's like, well, that one, everything was fine. They did a good performance, but like it was like framed weird, or it just didn't work for some reason. We had a scene like that in Princess Dragon where it's like we kept trying to like get this scene to like get in there, and just ultimately Miles moved it and then cut it.
Miles Crossman, the director,
rightly, because it although it was a scene favorite and had an important place in the plot and all that stuff, it just wasn't working, and it's hard to explain why. It just wasn't.
Now, you talked about how he took out a whole section and replaced it in your script.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Script.
So here's what happened is we wanted to write... Okay, so I'll just, for the sake of the dear listener and for context, the job of the writers is to complete the script. The job of the producers is to purchase and put all of the things they need to make that script real in place, including the director. And then the producer's job is to support the vision of the director. We sold the script to the production and then came on the production side. So now as producers, anything that the director wants, we have to be in support of, we have to try to make happen. We're not working for the writers, even though
You are the writer.
I want the people to know that they still have 2 out of 3 branches of the government working for them, and that ain't bad.
There's a point where you have to stop pushing back, because like you can still push back on certain things or say, you know, I have a different idea, but you know, you're really just advising in that scenario. Like you're trying to maybe like make the best, you know, you got this grand goal that we all share of like trying to make a good movie and whatever else. But then like there's this level where, you know, sure, you know, you want to push for your creative vision of it, but you have to just like at a certain point, you have to realize it's not your creative vision ultimately.
and the
Not anymore, right?
It can't
Not
be.
anymore.
It
And the
has to
director-
be one other person that takes over.
Yeah, and the director's, you know, ultimately responsible for accepting all the blame of their choices. And so if you don't give them the ability to make those choices, you also are taking away their agency, because they already know they're going to be blamed for what's wrong. So they're going to feel much more urge to get their vision across. In fact, the more no's you tell them as producers, the more they'll demand in that vision. So instead, so
at a certain point, you have to just back off and just switch gears completely.
to how do we
Even
make
if you
that
think they're wrong. Not that I'm saying we did this all the time with Miles or anything, but just like that's
But
the
in this very
dynamic.
specific instance, you know, we've been on the record in other places with him and in other things to say that as writers, we felt that the series of escalations should be between the main protagonist and the antagonist, and that we would ratchet those up in these escalating elements of violence, and that would be enough. And the director's point of view was, we don't have enough capacity to do that. But what we can do is raise some of the emotional stakes by putting in scenes, flashbacks, cutbacks to other elements of the story. And really what these all have in common with our conversation is it was right in the middle of the script, in that mushy middle. He's trying to escalate and give more to be happening and to cut to and to cut around than yet another murky hallway and yet another chase, right?
And make
So-
it more of a world in a sense, make there more like this character more of a person.
Is it otherwise it would have been just in almost one location the whole time?
Lots of locations, but the same. I mean,
But just like
and again, as a producer,
one-
he was right in we needed to have different notes. Otherwise, it would have been a little too metronomic. Now, as a writer, that's the vision I had.
Yeah.
If I had been directing it, I would have, you know, you could have set a metronome to the kind of violent notes I would have put in it. But it wasn't my movie to direct.
And as a writer, like I'm more of a, I don't care about the character and their interior dimension. It does not matter at all outside of how they respond to this situation. So all I care about is like who she was before this minute one. Absolutely irrelevant to me. I think it's irrelevant to the audience. You know, it doesn't matter what her motivations are.
So
And
you
I'm not
disagree-
interested in exploring her motivations.
Do you disagree with Shakespeare's statement that the past is prologue, that it's important to know where they came from?
It's not, I mean, I don't disagree with it in the sense that like, it's of course true on a certain level, but I just think like formally in a horror film for me is all about moving forward and just moving forward. And the second you move backward and take the foot off the gas, it's just a different type of horror film.
Okay, I'm going to rephrase
Which is
what
fine.
Jonathan was saying in defense of what Jonathan was saying. So let's imagine you've introduced a person into a movie that you know was going to be a horror movie. We don't need to know where they were before we see them opening in the van, driving the van. But if we want to make it scarier, then we put a car seat in the back. Right? Now that character obviously has more to lose.
Mhm.
And so we didn't need to know before that instant that there needed to be a car seat in the back. The reason for including the car seat, and therefore they were apparent, and therefore there is a prologue to their life, is really in service of the genre element, which is fear. characters that have something to lose fear more. Death, as
It's just
Jonathan has said,
implied.
is the last thing, is the best thing that can happen to you in a horror movie, because when you die, it's over for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's the suffering along the way, the ratcheting of tension that makes it worse.
When we did the Eye Collector, one of the things people will see when we finally get around to publishing some of the later copy like stories in the Eye Collector, there's a moment in the Eye Collector later, not the stuff you can get a hold of now, but some of the stuff you'll see later. There's a moment where like there's this woman Olympia who, you know, at one point, you know, she's basically her father gets murdered. And so the next thing that happens is she becomes a half spider woman, and she makes the plan that she's going to
But why does that happen?
go to the moon and eat the moon. It doesn't matter why, Dan. All that matters is like there is a reason it happens,
Right.
but the reasons are never explained
Both are
in a
distinct
clear
and
way.
poetic and symbolic, but like nobody.
And just the literal plot reason, like you find if you're paying really close attention, you can figure out that she's an automaton and she's been constructed robotically in such like a manner.
Mm-hmm.
She has been previously posing as a human, and now the pose is no longer needed.
And the Eye Collector originally comes from the moon. That's where he dwells normally, and so that's where
So there's
you gotta go. You're gonna get him for sure. You
There
gotta get him.
is a plot logic, but there's no point where like it's clear that's the plot logic. It's no point where it's laid out. Like it's just like that's happening. Now this is happening. Now this is happening.
We try to escalate it in the with Eye Collector. Tried to escalate it the same way nightmares can escalate, where
Right.
something you see is happening makes no sense except that it's happening.
And there's
And later when
poetic
you wake
logic.
up, you go, "Oh, that's why."
So you can write out like the plot. I did this the other day because we were doing a synopsis for the Eye Collector to pitch it out. In any case,
Can't say
I had to write out like what the plot is, and I was like writing it out, and I was like, "Wow, this makes way more sense than you know I thought it would," because there is a clear plot. Like I remember there being one, but it's like,
But then Gregory comes along.
But you know whether you can suss the plot out just reading this book, like so much of it is implied rather than stated. But it's a difference. But that's because I'm more of a formalist. I don't care about realism.
Yeah.
Whereas like Miles is less of a formalist. He's more interested in character psychology. He cares more about realism. He has more of a thematic thing to say on a certain level.
His day job as a senior editor for a television series means that all he's reminding people when they turn in their scripts is, why does anyone care? How do we escalate what the audience will feel, right? So these things are important to bring that and flex.
Yeah, like to me, it matters more that you, whether that corner of that room looks dark enough than whether or not a person is properly motivated.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So
I just
have a
want them to be
question.
properly motivated so you're not distracted by the fact that they're not properly motivated.
Mm-hmm.
A thought. This is a thought that occurred to me. Because Clive Barker's books of blood are back. They're going to be re-released. And
Oh,
I'm
really?
a big Clive Barker fan. And
Especially those books.
yeah, anyway, what made me think of that is in the original Hellraiser, the premise of Hellraiser is, of course, there's this little box that's open a door, a window into hell, and these horrible hellish creatures are going to come out. We don't go there right away, right? In that story, the first terrible, frightening, most horrible thing is the repeated pulling on a mattress. And in the close-up of the camera, you can see there's a loose nail in the wall. And the guy's bare hand is getting closer and closer and closer while he tries to take a mattress upstairs to that nail, right? There is nothing worse to me in cinema than that scene of the hand where we know is going to get torn. They're operating in the most normal way. It sucks to move a mattress upstairs, and the only way to do it, usually if you're by yourself, is to really reef on it. And it sets you up for a disaster that you don't see coming. This is exactly tonally matching the disaster that no one sees coming with the Hellraiser box and all of these other things, right? So if you're wondering what to put in the middle of your story, some things that echo the story should rhyme with itself, right? So what is some scenes in your middle that you feel like could be metaphorical for the entire story? In the I can't think of who directed it, but it'll come to me. The Robert De Niro, black and white, Ronin. Is it Michael Mann?
What?
You like
Ronin is about Ronin's not black and white.
Yeah, well, when I saw it, it was. Maybe they released it differently. Yeah, there's a black and white version.
That's the one with all the car chases in Italy.
But the reason I bring that up is there is a scene between two characters where the one ambushes the other with a cup of coffee.
Oh yeah,
And it's that middle, that's right in the middle.
yeah.
Right? And so what the characters are capable of in small ways, or what the whole film is about.
what I like is reversing things. And so when I think one of the best techniques to dealing with this quote unquote messy middle is if you just have a reversal in the middle, which you commonly have in horror anyway. And what I like to do after that point is I'll just write evil mirrors of the previous scenes. So if they were in one room before, they'll be back in that
evil
room.
mirrors,
And just literally the opposite of everything that was happening in the other scene will happen now. Like if before in the scene they were, fighting over the coffee was cold and, who made this shitty coffee or whatever. Now it's like, there's some liquid, the coffee's scalding them. It's magically too hot. It's, splashing out of the walls, burning their faces.
Don't run. We are your friends.
Maybe it won't be that obvious.
Okay, but even right there, let's imagine this scene in Meat House, which for the dear listener takes place in a cabin in the woods. Just that's all you need to know. So you have two characters who wish they could get a cup of coffee, and one of them says, "Hey, listen, I'll make it cowboy style. We'll just put a pot on the stove, boil some water, we'll put some grounds in there, and then we'll have to strain it." They leave that scene, and now another person comes in, right? After the coffee has just been poured and goes, "Oh, there's coffee," and sips it right away. It's going to be way too hot for them, right? Now you've done what we talked about before with the A and B, right? Making coffee for C, and then C comes in, the shitty director who's bossing everyone around, grabs his coffee, burns himself, right?
And even if you just take things you already written and then just rewrite them in the reverse way, I mean, it may not work, but now you've drafted a scene. Like you're out of the problem of being stuck. You're just working off a template on a certain level. And yeah, probably it won't work to just do that, but you can, that's now actually, usually that's a surprisingly good starting point to just do the opposite of what you already were doing or what you were thinking of doing. I find it almost always works to do the opposite of what your instincts.
It's like George Costanza. Doing the opposite of what it like.
I like to say first thought, worst thought.
Okay.
It's my sort of writing principle, which is the opposite of what most people say. Of course, intentionally. First thought, best thought. It's like, but first thought, best thought, probably your first thought.
I say first idea, worst idea, but it's the
first
same
idea, worst idea is the better way to put it.
Yeah.
Most people, unlike us, intelligent, educated elites, most people go first thought, best thought. Like,
oh God,
my instinct is correct.
As if your instinct is always correct. Now,
which in writing it often is a cliche.
right?
Instinct.
But let's separate it. Let's separate a story between informational layers, emotional layers, and escalation layers. Well, now your first thoughts related to emotion are probably just the way your brain encodes information with mood congruency. Those will be the best ideas. But the ones related to how to escalate it probably require a little more development, a little more intellect.
I've never put in a Meat House. I don't really know how it works.
And along those lines, though, sometimes people get stuck up they'll get stuck.
Wait. What's the closest you've ever been? This is an intervention now.
No, this is going to get on
something like the Meat House, where you've been somewhere where the rules are different than they were supposed to be. It could be something the most benign you can think of. But what's something where you thought it was one thing and then it was another thing?
Becoming a parent.
This is what someone should be talking about in those scenes, because you have intimate, emotional knowledge about those things that you can talk about. Take that piece and make that the emotional middle of your story, and the rest of it. In fact,
and this is
I'm excited now because Meat House does, because I know a little bit about the process of you writing it. It has this whole subtext of who's the parent of the creature, right? So there's 2 layers right there.
One of the things that is just connected to this idea too is like often people will get stuck too because they're trying to figure out how to escalate this plot properly. And maybe what you need to do is just do a scene where the emotion escalates. Like sometimes the problem is like the plot is ahead of the emotions, or vice versa, you know. But keep in mind too, like it doesn't have to be that everything in the story is escalating all the time. You could also be like the characters, you know, their feeling about a thing is escalating. You know, it could just be they're getting more afraid or more sad, or they're just getting more of a read on what's
frustrated
going on.
Is what's
more
happening.
frustrated.
Yeah.
So they don't have to have a plot progression all the time. Sometimes you just need a progression. So whether it's a plot progression or an emotional progression or just information progression or whatever, like as long as you have this things progressing, sometimes it'll help to separate those progressions. Like a lot of times they'll write like all those things together in one scene, but maybe that's 3 scenes, you know.
We'll wrap things up.
All right. As we wrap things up, I'll ask you a final question about Meat House, Dan. Do you have a clue path in your script?
Not really.
So one thing that has, with writing mysteries or writing supernatural elements, one thing that has been useful to me is figure out which objects in the setting would constitute for an intelligent character, a clue path, where if they found those 3 objects and put them together on a table, that it would give them some information or at least prompt a question. And then put them in the scenes in the middle of the story and let the camera reveal it to the audience. That will give you a little bit of or can provide a element where you know what's supposed to happen. You know what those things mean. You're withholding it from the audience, but the lens, the attention makes it important. Now the audience wants to know, and the only way they can know is through the actions of the characters. And so when characters are in the rooms with those objects, the audience, there's tension, there's escalation, because maybe they'll go to it. Maybe they'll open that drawer. Maybe they'll pick up that thing. Maybe they'll look at the carving, right? You just have to have them together in the same place. And suddenly there's escalation, right? The Goonies is a good example of this happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And so, dear listener, what we've done this whole episode is just talk about all the ways in which your story gets stuck in the middle. That's totally normal. All the ways in which we have suggested you could fix it aren't the only ways to fix it. There are 1,000 ways, maybe 100,000 ways, but nothing can be fixed if you don't write it down first. So all of these tricks that Jonathan and I have talked about relying on are ways in which we trick ourselves into having a first draft. Then you can show it to a smarter person for a better idea. So in order for you to show your draft to a smarter person for a better idea, I would say, dear listener, just write down whatever comes to mind and then move on from there. If you are stuck in your own mushy middle of your novel, comic, movie career, our advice to you is remember what Jonathan says. Nothing has to make sense.
And rarely, can I just say one last little thing? Because so rarely do things make sense also. Not that it shouldn't ultimately all tie together, but like I think one of the things you've got scratched out here, life is messy on your little notepad. One of the things that I've been thinking lately about this same sort of stuff when I'm trying to clean up my house, you know, and the problem immediately is like, you don't want to start because you know there's going to be this middle messy period where everything's just strewn all over the place. Nothing. So things are kind of sort of in an order, but they're in a bad order and it's messy and, you know, you don't like it. But you know that before you get to it being like where you want everything to be, everything's going to get worse. Right? Like it's going to get messier and more strewn out. And you got to like take all the stuff out of the box before you figure out whether it even needs to go back in this box. Like you just have to, on a certain level, just to get started and to carry through to the end of the project, you just have to, on a certain level, accept that the middle will be messy and stop trying to clean it up. And it's not time to clean it up.
It will always get worse before it gets better. This has been Super Pulp Science. I am GMB Kamichuk, encouraging you to join the fight and make comics.